With us on In Focus, does the Executive Ethics Code serve the purpose for which it was intended? By the way, what it was intended to do is to create public trust and confidence in public representatives, but also to protect the integrity of Parliament. Now, if you look at how the committee conducted this particular matter, it was behind closed doors, which is part, of course, of the challenges that Siviwe is raising. And the documents are also given on the day and taken away on the day. So we never know what those deliberations actually were about, except for a statement that cleared Dr. Zweli Mkhize of any wrongdoing as far as breaching the code of conduct. So, Siviwe, before the break, I was saying, what do you think are the factors that would have led Parliament to fail to debate the broader issues as you put them now, to really just confine them to the fact that, oh, well, the code says extended family member is a spouse, a permanent companion, or a dependent. Dr. Zweli Mkhize's son is not that because he's married, he's an adult, he makes his own money, and therefore he is not classified as a dependent.
Look, it will be difficult for me to speculate, Thabo, because the people who are part of that committee, well, we've got representation on, they are bound by confidentiality. So I wouldn't have known how the discussions would go. But I mean, it boggles the mind. And I mean, if you even look at public sentiment after the outcome was published, that a lot of South Africans are confused, because while we understand that there's a criminal justice system process that is unfolding, but Parliament has a role too, and Parliament should exercise its role carefully. And Thabo, what is more concerning here is that if indeed the Ethics Committee, which in my view has not exercised or flexed its muscle fully when it comes to this matter, it goes back to the issue that we saw unfolding during the State Capture Commission, where presiding officers of Parliament came out saying that, yes, indeed, Parliament failed to protect or at least prevent some of what happened under state capture. And I thought that it would be a lesson to the national legislature that, in fact, there is a role to play, to not just simply be there as rubber stampers of executive function, but to hold the executive to account. And the Executive Ethics Code is one such way to do so. And so it's important that in its application, it's not just done as a matter of ticking a box or crossing T's and dotting I's, but it's done comprehensively, looking at its intention, looking at the spirit of the code. And even the own chairperson, I think I was on one of the Newzroom's shows last week with him, where he said, look, I mean, this is all that we did. The code says this, we looked at this, and when it didn't align, we then moved on. And my view is that that committee exists to do far more than that. And that, especially in the context of a Parliament that should be rehabilitating itself and really flexing its muscle when it comes to holding the executive to account.
We're reflecting on that because we are about to release another tranche of funding for the relief efforts in the flood-hit areas throughout the country, as we are in a state of national disaster at this particular point. And of course, the question is being asked whether or not there is enough to be able to safeguard the behavior of the executive, the agencies, and those who are tasked with the responsibility, or at least delegated authority to release these funds. We will be able to hold them accountable. So if something like this code doesn't go further than just looking at the legalities or the legalistic approach, do you think that it is serving what it's intended to do, which really is to ensure that public servants uphold propriety, integrity, and ethical values in their conduct? Will we be able, after, again, the release of more funds, be able to hold these people to account?
Yeah. Look, I mean, that's why, in my view, if the committee and the Ethics Committee is going to take this approach, then, Thabo, it's clear that whatever is made implicit needs to be made explicit in the code. And there are ways in which to do that, and there are ways to amend the code so that it can be drafted in such a way that it captures some of these things that are falling through the cracks. One would think that the crack is really small, though, and so it was quite surprising to see that even in the context of what the committee had in front of it, they arrived at the conclusion that they did. But nonetheless, now it's incumbent on us to look at the code. It's been amended before, and so there is a precedent to amend it. And we can use this, we use this case to say, look, some of these things are logical, and you know, when one looks at immediate family, one has to be broad in their thinking. Otherwise, it's a massive loophole that even people who seek to loot public funds will utilize freely. And with regards to the state of disaster and the tranche of funds that, as you mentioned, I think that's why it's very important that Parliament establishes an ad hoc committee, because then, Thabo, what we mustn't do is essentially look at things retrospectively, where money has already been stolen, and then we look at what went wrong. Parliament should be at the forefront of making sure that we are creating the checks and balances as things happen. And that's why I now view that there should be an ad hoc committee that looks at the state of disaster, its duration, the money spent, where is it going, where is it being spent, what are some of the spending patterns, and whether or not it's being spent for the people of South Africa. And so it's important that Parliament understands and really, really settles its role, Thabo, because without that kind of watch body over executive function, we are truly letting the people of South Africa down. So it's now instructive and incumbent on the institution in the next week, as the President addresses the House, that we need to decide that an ad hoc committee needs to be the parliamentary oversight body over the functions of the state of disaster that's been announced.
Now, over and above just the changing of the code, do you think there are institutional factors that would need to change? For example, the issue that you're raising, is there something that can be done so that these deliberations don't happen in secrecy? You know, one of the things that made, for example, the ESCOM inquiry and all the other inquiries that were happening at that time to be so effective, in a sense, was that they were done publicly and everybody could see the parliamentarians putting questions to those who should have been answering the questions. And in a sense, it forced one to really be honest. Do you think if such a process is done publicly and in a sense, even briefings around these matters are done publicly, it would help?
Absolutely. I think that last part is absolutely important, because one may make an argument about why investigations of this nature need to happen in committee. But, Thabo, historically, this committee has never acted or behaved in this way, where there's absolutely no taking the public into its confidence about the process that it has followed, the terms of reference of the investigation, what it looked at, who it spoke to, and how it reached the conclusion. If you look at previous cases of Dinapule and the like, and how this committee in the past has done its job, you'll see that, in fact, there was some level of public accountability. While some aspects of it were conducted behind closed doors, the process that was followed was then publicly outlined. And so it really boggles the mind why there's been, an eroding of that kind of culture, and progressively the committee has become a lot more secretive because, of course, it doesn't fulfill its function for itself. Those committee members are there fulfilling a public purpose of serving South Africans. And so, in my view, we should make sure that the committee goes back to making sure that whatever cases are before it, once decisions or preliminary conclusions have been reached, that the public is taken into confidence by explaining what the terms of reference, what did we look at. Because, of course, I mean, in the letter that I received from the committee, it simply says we looked at the invoices, and on the basis of that, we couldn't find a direct link to Dr. Mkhize in relation to the upgrade at his house. I mean, but, if you were to present that publicly and be open to interrogation, the simple question would be, how do security upgrades happen at your house and you not know anything about it, and you not know who would have foot the bill? And so, yes, I agree with you. There's a far more, there's greater room for transparency, and it used to be like that. But it has of late become a far more closed process. And so we look forward to this report being tabled in the House, because these are some of the things that we are going to raise.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, their letter in response, they're saying they took in consideration the complaint within set parameters of the code, and thus their exoneration is based on those limitations. But two, they are saying there was no documentary evidence to support, of course, that there was any dealings between Dr. Mkhize and the electrical company. Now, you are saying this is going to go beyond just further than the parliamentary process. With the lack of that documentary evidence, do you think you stand a chance of succeeding in a criminal process that probably be investigated by the NPA?
Look, I mean, I think the limitations of the ethics committee are there. Then they make that clear that they don't have the capacity to look at things beyond, look into the criminality of these things. And that's why we went to them, right? Because there is an ongoing process. The matter was reported to SAPS. The Hawks are now currently dealing with the matter. The SIU was looking into it and produced a comprehensive report that shocked the country. But there's room for Parliament to do its job, and there's room for Parliament to play a role in ensuring that we investigate how members of the executive conduct themselves in accordance to a code that was agreed to. So I think that in terms of that, in my view, in terms of the role of Parliament, I think that this finding leaves a lot to be desired. And in terms then of the other criminal justice system processes that are ongoing, we are keeping a very close eye on that. We were pleased to see some of the outcomes of the SIU tribunal about some of the monies that are to be recuperated. So we're looking closely at that because, of course, Dr. Mkhize does remain a member of Parliament, and whatever the outcomes of that are, they will, in fact, impact on whether or not he continues to be a member of Parliament, but also just generally where this investigation goes.
Siviwe Gwarube, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. DA Member of Parliament, Siviwe Gwarube there.